'Twas the night before Christmas, and deep in the house a creature was stirring, ready to pounce. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care, whilst phantom footsteps ascended the stair. The children were nestled, all snug in their beds, but a dark shadow figure loomed over their heads. And Mama in her kerchief, and I in my cap, were about to be woken by one ghostly rap.
Hi, I'm Lil.
And I'm Fitz.
And you're listening to Knock Once for Yes.
It is December. 2020 is very nearly over, and I think we'll all be pleased about that. It's also the Knock Once for Yes Christmas special, so things are looking up already. On top of that, it is our 50th episode. We have reached our half century, so we will raise our bats and pause briefly for applause. Apologies to non-cricket playing countries for the cricket reference.
And apologies to all the other listeners who live in cricket playing countries and have no idea what that reference was about whatsoever, like me. But now, settle in. The fire is roaring, the wine is mulling, and we've got a whole box of Christmas crackers at our disposal. It's time to get festive with some ghost stories at Christmas. So Fitz, what have we got coming up on today's episode?
Today we have some Cornish Christmas ghost stories on the Paranormal Radar, listener stories from Flick, Colin, Sam and Aimee. We pay a visit to Ely in this episode's Paranormal Postcard, and of course, the ever-cheesy, slightly dodgy, Knock Once for Yes Christmas quiz.
Christmas quiz! I'm so ready.
I'm not sure I am, because Lil has warned me in advance that her quiz questions are extra hard this year.
I did not say they were extra hard. I just said about one question that I'm pretty sure there's no way you can get it.
Yeah, she literally turned to me and said, "You're never going to get this. You haven't got a hope of getting this question."
It wasn't quite that dramatic, but yeah, I don't think you're going to get it.
I was like, oh, thanks very much. But we shall find out whether I know that question or not shortly. But first, we would like to say a huge thank you to our latest patrons.
Harriet Conneeds,
Cam Thompson,
Ashley Russell,
Jennifer Maureen Clayfield,
Frederique Marmol,
Amanda Reed,
and we'd also like to thank Elizabeth Lavoie for upping her pledge.
Thank you so much to all of our patrons and KOFY supporters, as we really couldn't make the show without you.
And thank you so much to all of you, listeners, KOFY supporters, patron supporters, anybody that shared the show with their friends, for supporting us through this incredibly hard year. I know it's been difficult for everybody, but you lot have kept us going. You are absolutely awesome. Thank you.
It's almost time now for the Paranormal Radar, but first, the Knock Once for Yes Christmas quiz.
We're getting started on the quiz already.
Quiz question 1, Lil.
Oh, am I going first?
You're going first.
Whoa.
Bring it up. Is this the hard one?
Oh, I can't remember. Let me check my notes. Oh, yes, it is actually the hard one that I don't think you'll get in a million years.
Okay.
Okay. Question 1. Rendlesham Forest is a name that will be familiar to many because of a very famous UFO sighting that occurred over Christmas of 1980. But that's not the only paranormal thing to be found in these woods. Can you tell me what cryptid Rendlesham Forest is known for?
I'm familiar with Rendlesham Forest and the Rendlesham Forest incident. I don't believe I'm familiar with any cryptids, but I shall rack my brains.
You do that. You've got a little bit of time to think while you tell us what you've got for us today on the Paranormal Radar, and then I will reveal the answer.
I shall mull it over while I tell you about this episode's Paranormal Radar. And getting into the Christmas spirit are Cornwall Live, who shared a story about the ghosts that haunt Cornwall at Christmas time. Phantom coaches and horsemen, including a headless one, seem to be a common theme, with 3 of them appearing at various locations across the county during the festive period. The ghosts of Nicholas and Elizabeth Hurl are both said to haunt Dockacre, a 16th century mansion in Launceston, and a strange floating light is seen following a path in Newquay that unnerves local fishermen. But my favourite story is that of the ghost of Pendine Manor Farm. On the farm is an Iron Age man-made cave called a Fugu. There does seem to be some confusion by historians over the purpose of these Fugu, with some suggesting that they were for ritual purposes, some that they were used for food storage, and others that they were used for hiding from raiders. In this case, legend tells that the Fugu had a passageway that led down to the sea, and there's even a somewhat unlikely suggestion that it led to the Isles of Scilly, which are 28 miles away. However far the tunnels originally went is unimportant for our story though. Locals say that a white lady appears at the mouth of the cave every year on Christmas morning. In her mouth, she holds a single red rose. If you're unlucky enough to witness her apparition, it is said to foretell your death within the year, and if you're brazen enough to follow her back into the cave, she transforms into a hideous monster. The insinuation being that in this case, your life expectancy is somewhat less than 12 months.
I've never heard of a Fugu, but I have to say, when I read this, all I saw was Iron Age man cave. I don't know why my brain just skipped over the word in between. I was like, awesome, an Iron Age man cave? That's cool.
What Lil's buttering over for you slightly is the fact that even though I wrote this bit, the first time we did this, I said Iron Age man cave, and we both had to giggle and stop and start again.
But seriously, even like the third time, I still read man cave.
Yeah, and Fugu. I never heard of a Fugu before.
No.
And I had to look it up because obviously it's not spelt the way you think it would sound.
No, it's spelt Fogu, which is really odd. And because I'm into archaeology and especially Iron Age archaeology, I can't believe I've never heard of that before. It's really interesting.
Yes, they are quite an interesting subject, so do look them up afterwards. But yeah,
I'm gonna.
Interesting story, and the monster in the cave is it was the most interesting story out of all of them. A lot of them were pretty classic, and I suppose, your kind of white lady is fairly classic in the ghost story sense, but yeah, just the cave monsters.
Oh no, yeah, that is a new one on me.
Indeed. So, come on then, put me out of my misery.
You got no idea which cryptid can be found in Rendlesham Forest?
I'm going to guess.
Go on, have a guess.
Because the first thing that springs to mind was werewolf, and then I was like, no, they're more sort of European, whereas here it's black shuck. So I'm going to go with black shuck.
Well, you're not a million miles out. I'm going to give you a half point. It's not called a werewolf or a black shuck, although some people have posited that it may be at least a branch of one of those things and kind of speculated some similarities to either werewolf or black shuck, but it's actually called the shug monkey.
The shug monkey. Oh, come on, it's even similar and it's so close.
Shug, yeah, exactly. It's the monkey part that I knew would throw you because
they've got to be related, surely.
Well, the monkey part threw me completely. But described as a bizarre kind of British Bigfoot, but walking on four muscular legs reminiscent of a lion's, with thick, glossy black fur, piercing eyes, flared nostrils, and huge, powerful jaws. And, as you say, this might sound a bit like a black shuck or a bit Beast of Bodmin-like. But then another witness description says that the beast looked like a combination of an ape, a dog, a bear, a lion, and a rhinoceros.
Has somebody got one of those children's what does the animal say spinny things? And it's like, what does it look like? A lion.
And just mix them all. I mean, what a combination of things. It's just not, none of those are things that should ever go together. A local police constable offered the description, a cross between a big rough-coated dog and a monkey with big shining eyes. Sometimes it would shuffle along on its hind legs, and at other times it would whiz past on all fours. So you've got more of the werewolf kind of vibe going on there, I think. But wait, it gets weirder. One witness, who was horrified enough to come across the part ape, part bear, dog-like beast in the first place, then had to look on in dismay as she watched it turn into a winged gargoyle-like creature and fly off into the night.
So it's sort of Black Shuck, Evil Monkey, Sasquatch, Mothman.
Yeah, I was just going to add the /Mothman at the end.
And what's in the water down there?
I don't know what's in the woods for sure. There is some seriously weird stuff going on down at Rendlesham Forest, but we definitely have to go there and visit because not only do they have a cryptid and the UFO sighting, they also have a UFO walking trail that you can follow through the forest.
Awesome. And if you're really lucky, you'll get abducted and dropped at the end so you don't even have to walk it all.
I love a good walk through the woods. We should definitely go.
I think we should.
Well, if you want the full story on the Rendlesham Shug Monkey, do go and check out the Weird Suffolk webpage at the East Anglian Daily Times, where you can find this story and many more fascinating supernatural tales from around Suffolk.
Well, I must admit, I'm pleasantly hopeful. If that was the super duper hard one, then I might not do too bad on the next questions. We'll see. I haven't done anything particularly evil this year, and I've stuck with a sort of Christmas theme.
Go on.
So you may well know this one. I'd be interested to see. What is a Christmas tradition from the Ukraine that's believed to be the origin for tinsel on Christmas trees?
Oh, I've got an idea. I don't know whether it's right, but I've got something in my head, so I'll save it for after the story.
See, you're a lot more confident than I was. I literally had to guess mine, so I don't think mine is too bad. But yeah, I'm interested to see, and it's quite an interesting story as well, so we shall see. But speaking of stories, it's time for our first listener story of the episode, and this one is from Flick.
I'm a dog walker, and on Friday I had the strangest experience. I was walking 6 dogs of various sizes, ages and breeds around 1 p.m. in Dulwich Park, South London. Dulwich is a beautiful area full of large period properties, quaint cottages, tasteful conversions and new builds, and it retains a village feel. The park contains a picturesque lake, beautifully manicured hedges and lawns, and borders a grandiose private school called Dulwich College, and an art gallery. There's often filming and photo shoots taking place in and around the area because it's exquisite, so I wasn't surprised to see 2 young women in 1940s outfits walking towards me. I figured they were part of a film set or art installation in the gallery. They were arm in arm, giggling and laughing. One was dressed in a 2-piece skirt suit with dainty little shoes, her hair rolled up and pinned at the sides. The other was dressed as a land girl in green overalls, boots, and a scarf over her hair, knotted at the front. They seemed oblivious to me, but were enthralled with and smiling at the herd of dogs and their leads I was wrestling. When they were almost parallel with me, I said hello, and they both visibly blanched, and their gaze moved from the dogs to me. I was taken aback. They were slender and quite small, and were both absolutely beautiful, their faces perfectly made up, flawless like porcelain dolls, their skin luminescent, radiant even. I thought to myself, oh, they're definitely models or film stars. They both said hello, and the one in the suit admired the dogs in a really cut glass, clipped accent, which to me sounded a bit faux and put on. I said how amazing they looked in their 1940s wear and asked if they were in a film or attending an exhibition or convention or something. The one dressed as a land girl looked at me bemused and said, "Oh no, dearie, we're going to tea whilst we're able." I thought, oh hell, they're both still in character because she also spoke with a clipped 1940s accent. And who says dearie nowadays? Besides, it was 1 p.m, lunchtime, not tea time. In my book, it's 3 p.m. for afternoon tea or after 5 p.m. for tea, dinner time. I shrugged, nodded and smiled and said, "Okay, ladies, have a lovely afternoon." And off they walked. I became aware that all 6 dogs were absolutely silent and unmoving. The 2 huskies were lying down with their heads on their paws. The British Bulldog and Shar-Pei were standing, looking in the direction they'd walked off in, and the Dachshund and Fox Terrier were standing stock still either side of me, their hackles up but not making a sound. Now, this troop of dogs are usually very vocal and will mob anyone who shows them the slightest bit of attention, except this time it seemed. I turned to shout after the ladies what a good effect they'd been on the dogs. I could see they were only 20 feet away, but something was very wrong. I couldn't work out what it was. And then I realised that despite their attire and the fact that they were laughing and joking with each other, and not least because they were two stunning young women, not a single other person took a blind bit of notice of them. They passed amongst people completely unnoticed. I stood there thinking how bizarre it was, and then I froze as I realised they were walking on air. Their feet were stepping about 6 inches above the ground. I stood there staring, gobsmacked. It must have shown on my face because passers-by looked at my expression and then in the direction of my gaze. But being London, no one said anything. My mind raced over the whole incident. They startled when I said hello. They must go unnoticed. They admired the dogs, but they didn't touch them. It had been drizzling with rain and was windy, and yet they were immaculate, dry and not a hair out of place. The clipped accent was pure 1940s. I didn't get a sensation or a feeling in my stomach. Nothing. They looked real. Their faces so perfect they looked airbrushed, and they interacted with me. Either I hallucinated that whole incident, or I met 2 wartime ladies. I didn't feel scared, just stunned. Why me?
And thank you to Flick for sharing that story. That was a really interesting one.
I know,
I could pick at that for ages, but
yep.
I have a sort of fondness for Second World War aviation before it all got into jets and beyond visual range. I like props and stuff, and that is sort of my thing. And I like going
That's
to
your
sort of,
era, isn't it?
Yeah, I like going to the sort of reenactments and things like that. And you do see people dressed in the same clothes at the reenactments, and like you say, you're in an area where filming can take place and things like that. So yeah, I can completely understand. You see something like that, the first thought isn't necessarily, oh, that's a ghost. It's just, oh, I wonder if they're filming around here, or if there's an event on or something like that.
Even the fact that they were in character isn't beyond the pale, to be honest. I mean, the amount we've gone to so many reenactments, and people do stay in character for the public a lot of the time. But then
Plus,
obviously...
Don't forget, we're in Britain, and there are... We're famous for having eccentric people, so having somebody that speaks in a clipped 1940s accent, again, my first thought would be, oh, he's a bit eccentric.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't be, they're a bit eccentric. It wouldn't be, again, it's definitely a ghost.
Until...
You've got a lot of things rolling together to sort of give you that impression, and I get it. And floating 6 inches off the ground is pretty much a dead giveaway.
Exactly. All of those things could be forgiven apart from the fact that, they're walking above the actual modern level of the ground. And the fact that other people didn't seem to see them or notice them. I mean, it's not unheard of to have people walking around like we've just discussed, but people do notice. You're not going to have somebody like that walking through a crowd of people with nobody casting a glance at them or anything.
No, nowadays people would have their smartphones out and taking pictures.
Yeah, they probably would. So obviously the reaction of the dogs was very strange. And we see that so many times where animals have like a more acute sense of the paranormal than humans do. But I suppose the one thing that got me so much about that story was the wartime lady's reaction to the modern person. And again, we're back to this idea of who's the ghost.
Yeah.
Because that was almost more like some sort of a time slip where, these wartime ladies are like, oh, they're just focusing on the dogs and aren't the dogs wonderful? And then they look up and realise that there's something about this person that is leading the dogs that doesn't look right. And it's almost like a role reversal.
Yeah, what were they experiencing? Was it like... because if they've seen the dogs, they've obviously seen her, and I presume to them she would be dressed quite strangely.
Very strange. Well, I mean, I don't know what she was wearing, but modern clothes are going to look odd, aren't they?
So, interesting. I could pick through this for hours, but it's fascinating But yeah, like you say, it's interesting whether it's a time slip, they're in the 40s and they're experiencing this woman, or whether they are ghosts, but then would they be rushing off for tea if they knew they weren't alive anymore?
There's a lot of questions there. We could be unraveling that one for hours.
We could.
But we can't because we've got more quiz questions.
We do. So, can you remember my question? Did you have a response?
Give me a recap.
So, my question was, what is a Christmas tradition from the Ukraine that's believed to be the origin for tinsel on Christmas trees?
Okay, well, I don't know about a Christmas tradition, but I am aware of a story of I think it's like a poor woman who couldn't afford Christmas decorations and presents, and then a friendly spider took pity on her and wove a beautiful silvery web all over her tree, and she woke up Christmas morning and this tree was all glittering and beautiful, and that's the origin of tinsel.
You have completely nailed it. Yes. Well done. 1 point to you. I am half a point behind. Oh dear.
Oh, we're actually keeping track of the score this time.
Well, I shall try to. I'm sure we'll forget in a minute. We shall rely on our listeners to let us know who's won at the end. But yeah, I was going to tell you the story, but you pretty much nailed it.
Sorry.
Yep. A poor, hard-working widow dropped a pine cone on the earthen floor of her hut, and it took root and grew. And her children were very excited at the thought of having an actual Christmas tree at Christmas. They couldn't afford to decorate it, though, as you say. So when the children went to sleep, they woke up the next morning to find the tree covered in cobwebs. And when they opened the windows, the first rays of sunlight touched the webs and turned them gold and silver. The widow and her children were overjoyed.
I didn't know the bit about the pine cone growing into a tree, so that was a nice little detail there I was not aware of.
Indeed. And apparently from then on they never lived in poverty again. I'm not entirely sure whether this is the golden spider or whether it was just a lucky,
lucky tree?
It seems to be the lucky Christmas spider is what it's sort of now known as. So I think it's more of it didn't keep making gold and silver. It was just right. They were lucky and that continued for them.
So do you feel any more enamoured of spiders now?
No.
You're not a fan, are you?
No. If they could produce gold and silver for me, I would reconsider my opinion. But until then, they deserve.
It'll still be me ousting them out of the bathroom. We don't aim flamethrowers at spiders. I gently rehome them in the garden.
If I don't make the cat eat them first.
I gently rehome them in the garden before anything bad happens to them. I love spiders.
We'll agree to differ on that point, I think. So, your first question was meant to be the hard one, and I kind of half got it. Mine, I didn't sort of particularly go for it being difficult. I just went down the Christmas theme and stuck with it. So now it's time for your second question, and I'm hoping this isn't quite as hard as the last one.
Well, but the problem is, you see, when I told you that was the hardest question, I'd only written one question.
Oh, here come the excuses.
You might get the third one, but I'm not sure you get this one because I didn't know this either. Okay, so I think it's fair to say that our favourite TV series of this year, well, our favourite TV series in recent years probably, has been the BBC TV series Ghosts. And as we record this, we're very excited because there's a Christmas special coming soon.
Yay.
But can you tell me where the real Button House is? Where was the series filmed? And for a bonus point, what grisly discovery did they make during renovations?
I don't know it, but I did read an article that told me where it was, and it just didn't stick in my head because it wasn't that interesting. But I don't know.
I disagree.
It wasn't that it was uninteresting. I don't think it was relevant necessarily to me, and it didn't really do anything for me, so it didn't stick. I'm wondering whether they've accidentally sort of cottoned onto something that actually happened with all the plague dead in the basement. Whether that it might actually be that they have found a plague burial pit.
I'm giving nothing away, but you've got a bit of time to think about it because it's time for another story.
Indeed, this story comes from Colin, and he's kindly recorded it himself, so we can sit back and listen much like you do.
I was 5 years old when my family moved into a simple ivy-covered house outside of Little Rock, Arkansas. The house was built in the 60s and had nothing about it that would get it cast as a haunted house in even the lamest of ghost stories. But the land around the house has a long history due to the road being one of the oldest routes through the state. I suspect it is the history of the land that gave me my story. I can clearly recall the sunny morning in the room I shared with my brother. As I was blinking my eyes awake, I looked across the room to the bright window. That's when I saw a woman sitting cross-legged on the edge of my brother's bed. At first it seemed awkward that she was facing the wall, and then it registered that her body was like still smoke in the sunlight. She was completely nude, and she was headless. Of course, I pulled the covers over my head to hide from the sight, and after a few minutes of trying to keep my frantic breath quiet, I looked again to find her gone. My mother said she almost fainted when she heard me telling my brother I'd just seen a headless woman sitting on his bed. Not just because this is a scary thing to hear a child say, but because just the week before my father had seen the headless woman, this time clothed, glide out of their bathroom to lean over my mother, then stand up and vanish. This started a conversation about ghosts and hauntings in my family, where I found out about my grandmother seeing spirits as a young girl, and of family friends having interactions with ghosts. And it started a lifelong interest in the supernatural for me. I began to read everything I could about ghosts and haunted places, but reading really doesn't touch the reality of seeing. Like the Saturday morning, I woke up early and took my pillow and blanket into the den to watch cartoons before anyone else got up. I had only 1 foot on the carpet of our TV room when I was shocked still by the sight of the woman, again sitting cross-legged, again nude and headless, in the middle of the room. I was instantly through the door with the lights on, my blood pounding in my ears, in the hopes that she would not come through the door after me. After a while, when I could, I looked into the room to find it empty and the sun coming up. That was the last time I saw the apparition, but not the last of our interactions. And I can't recall the number of times as I entered and went through my teens that a light would flicker back on after I had turned it off, or the TV would come back on as I was leaving the room. I never felt any malice from her, and it was a pretty gentle haunting. My father recently recalled seeing a hanging plant bouncing by itself in an empty room. Spooky, but not scary. At least not until the night of my 15th birthday. I had 3 friends stay over to celebrate. We had set up the tent in the backyard so that we could stay up and be loud without disturbing my family, but there was a pressure in the air that night and a low fog coming up from the creeks nearby. And though they weren't a fixture of my stretch of the highway, we could hear a herd of cattle lowing through the quiet country night. This atmosphere outside stirred my friends up a little, and so we decided to go into the den to watch TV until we fell asleep. But that never happened. Dean, Pat, Bobby, and I were sitting in a close circle, talking out our teen ideas with the TV murmuring behind me when I saw Dean and Bobby jump in unison. Dean hoarsely whispered, "Dude, did you hear that?" And Bobby replied, "Shut up, just shut the F up, you didn't hear nothing." Pat and I started excitedly asking what they had heard because we had heard nothing at all. And they said that they had heard a girl say my name. Of course, sounding like the little girl from Poltergeist. We thought it might be my sister, so I went to check, but she was fast asleep. And so we sat and talked about anything else we could think of to distract us from the scare and ease the tension. But then somewhere in our ramblings, 1 or 2 of them, I can't remember, heard a crying that turned to laughter. And that's when I became frightened. Lights turning on and seeing quiet figures in the middle of the room, even headless ones, was one thing, but crying and laughing in the middle of the night was quite another. We didn't know what to do but to stay put and talk a lot. Eventually, Pat and I had to use the bathroom, of course. And so it being my house, my ghost, I had to go first to make sure the coast was clear, even though I wasn't feeling all that brave. After making it to the bathroom without incident, I headed back to the den. I saw Pat waiting in the dining room, and as soon as I saw him jump like a rabbit, up and sideways through the door into the den. When I got in there, he was telling my friends about how he had heard a gasp, looked over, and saw in the coat rack mirror a person in a Civil War uniform standing next to him who was headless. None of us slept or moved that night until we got up to call a friend's father to come get him at 5 a.m, and I don't recall any of them staying over after that. And the rest of my teen years passed as I've told, with flickering lights, TVs coming back on, and me wondering why she called my name, but I didn't hear her.
Thank you, Colin, for sharing that story. And Colin, you did a fantastic job of narrating that, if I may say so, sir.
Yeah, I was going to say, before we actually get into the story itself, if you do not currently have a podcast
you should.
or have a job as an audiobook narrator, then that's your calling in life.
Yeah, absolutely. But what a story. I mean, obviously the biggest thing that grabs you first is the headless ghost aspect. There are so many stories from history of headless ghosts, but how often do you find them in modern day?
I don't know. We've come across it quite a few times, and I can't remember if I've mentioned it before on the show, but I did have a sort of hypothesis about these headless ghosts, because I think we've said before, a lot of them, they seem too small or too tall, or they're not quite right. And I've often wondered whether what we're seeing is what their impression is of themselves. And a lot of, especially older ghosts, you don't see your face very often. Like, especially sort of going back before mirrors were commonplace.
I mean, I can definitely see that with faceless ghosts. Faceless ghosts is something we come across a lot where, you know, witnesses report seeing a hood and just no face underneath the hood, or a figure and just that their brain can't seem to compute the face and there appears to be nothing there. And that makes total sense to me. Like you say, especially from older periods of history, mirrors weren't common. You wouldn't often see your own face. You'd see your clothes. You'd have an idea of a concept, a personal sort of idea of how you looked by what you wore and what colour your hair was and all that kind of thing. But you wouldn't really see your face on a daily basis. So if it's a projection of your image of yourself in your mind, then that would make sense. But I feel like headless is a bit different. I mean, the first thing that springs to mind is when you get foot ghosts that don't have any legs or feet, because they appear to be sort of walking, almost wading through the middle of the floor in circumstances where like the floor level's changed. But that doesn't really make sense here, because obviously one of the ghosts was sitting, one of the ghosts was standing, so that wouldn't account for them being headless.
Yeah, and I'm wondering, if we go down the sort of stone tape theory idea, whether it's just out of the recording area. It's just not something that it's recorded.
Yeah.
And again, with the legs, like, I know sometimes it's the fact that things have changed over the years and things are, the ground level has risen, so you're not seeing all of them. But you do also see ghosts that seem to be walking and yet they disappear sort of from the thighs or the knees down.
Yeah,
so I wonder whether, again,
it's
it's just there's a band of what's being recorded and that's just the edge, and that's not covered.
It's a really weird concept, and it's one of those really mind-blowing ones that you try and think of it from every angle and just get more and more confused the more you think about it. But it's a really interesting one, and I don't think we've ever had one quite like that before.
No, fascinating story and extremely well told. Thank you so much, Colin. We really enjoyed that.
Okay, so do you have an answer for quiz question number 2? Well, my quiz question number 2.
Remind me of the question once more.
So, can you tell me which real house was the location for the Button House from the TV series Ghosts? And what was the grisly discovery they found during renovations?
I cannot. Is it somewhere in Norfolk?
Nope.
No, I could guess.
Southborough.
No, I can't remember what it was called or where it was.
I'll put you out of your misery. It was West Horsley Place, a Grade 1 listed medieval manor house in Surrey. And the rather grisly find was the discovery of an executioner's axe whilst renovating a derelict and unused room. In 2014, historian Bamber Gascoigne unexpectedly inherited the manor house from his great aunt, not entirely unlike the main characters in the TV series. A spokesperson for West Horsley Place said there was no record of any executions taking place at the house, although since Norman times beheading has brought about changes in ownership of the manor house and its surrounding 380-acre estate, including the execution of Sir James Berners, charged with misguiding King Richard II, Henry Courtenay, convicted of treason, and Sir Walter Raleigh's wife, who lived at West Horsley Place for 4 years, apparently had a habit of carrying her husband's severed head around with her in a red leather bag.
Oh, lovely.
To top it all off, probably the most famous resident of West Horsley Place was, drumroll, Henry VIII, which could possibly explain the executioner's axe all by itself, I should think.
He was known for chopping people's heads off on a frequent basis.
I wouldn't be surprised if he just took one, to bed.
Just for fun. Just in case. He had an emergency execution that needed doing pronto.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I fluffed that one, so I'm not going to win this at all, am I?
Well, I don't know.
Got much chance.
It depends what you've got in store for me, doesn't it?
Well, I haven't really got anything particularly difficult, I don't think. I think you possibly struggled with the last one, maybe, but...
Come on, hit me.
Okay, so my second question, and you could probably just intuit this one. As you know, it's traditional at Polish Christmas dinners to leave an extra place at the table in case an unexpected guest turns up. And in Portugal, they have a similar tradition, but what is it?
A similar tradition, but... obviously I know the Polish one.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, no, I don't know. I don't think I'm going to get this one, despite your confidence.
You could guess.
Well, I may well do that. But before that, shall we have another story?
We should.
And this one is from Sam.
One event that changed how I viewed everything paranormal was this. My eldest son was doing his best rebellious teen act late one night. He'd had too much to drink and staggered over to the lounge room couch and lay there drunkenly passed out flat on his back. My wife and myself were in bed asleep and blissfully oblivious to all of this until we were woken up by the sound of a bell ringing loudly and persistently in the corner of our bedroom. As soon as I heard it, I knew what the sound of the bell was. We had a decorative string of colourful cotton birds hanging on the curtain rod over the sliding door that led out onto the porch off our bedroom. At the bottom of these strung-up birds was a handmade brass bell. That was the sound I'd heard. It had woken both of us from a deep sleep. I sat up in bed, very much awake. The room was dark, and I'll admit I was confused and scared in equal measure. I turned to my wife, who was also sitting up in bed, and we both said at once, "Did you just hear that bell ring?" I reached over and snapped on the bedside lamp, and we both looked over to the string of birds which was swaying back and forth from the curtain rod. It was as though our eyes had now confirmed what our ears had heard. The birds continued to sway away, but in this weird manner. Not in an equal arc at all, but more like forwards, back, stop. Forwards, back, stop. I have no idea why, but I got the overwhelming feeling that something bad was about to happen, and feeling jumpy, I got out of bed and headed out down the hall towards the kitchen, thinking that I needed a calming cup of hot tea. Halfway down the hallway, I noticed that the lounge room light was on, and then I heard choking, gurgling sounds coming from the lounge room. I raced down the rest of the hall into the room and ran over to the couch my son was passed out on. I could tell he was about to vomit, and I grabbed hold of his arms and dragged his dead weight up into a sitting position as best I could. Seconds later, he threw up all over himself. I yelled out to my wife for help and heard her come running down the hallway. She helped me prop my son up. He'd not even come out of his drunken stupor, even though he just vomited and was being hauled around by the two of us. After we'd cleaned my son up and gotten him into a safe position on his side, my wife and I just sat and stared at each other. We were both thinking the same thing. Whatever had rung that bell had woken us up with a warning, and it had saved my son's life. There was no doubt in my mind that he would have aspirated if I'd not been there to help him. After all this was over, I told my son how lucky he was to have someone looking out for him. In a rare moment of acute self-awareness, he shook his head and said, "I think they're actually looking after you, Mum, trying to save you the sorrow of losing your son." Maybe he was right. Maybe it wasn't a ghost at all, but a version of my son or myself or my wife from an alternate reality looking after us. Maybe it was a dead relative, maybe an angel. I still don't know. But what I do know is that my son's life was saved that night by something I can't explain. Up until that event, I had thought of the paranormal in terms of ghosts and hauntings, but now I think there's more to it than that. Something that has knowledge of possible future events and can manipulate matter in a way we can't begin to understand, that has the power to change whole lives and outcomes on this plane. I still own that string of birds, but thankfully it's never rung again. I want to add that this happened in winter. Our bedroom door and windows were shut, and our cat wasn't in the room. That bell rang more than once, and quite frantically. I still can't explain any of it.
Thank you, Sam, for sharing that incredible story. That one really got the goosebumps raised on my arms. All over chills. What an amazing thing to happen.
It was. Amazing was literally the word that just popped into my mind when I was reading that. It was just... And there's not a lot to say about it because it is what it says on the tin. It's like...
That is a warning.
Something bad was going to happen. The bell rang, woke you up, you fixed it.
Saved the day.
Saved the day.
Literally. And
again, like you say, I'm no closer to telling you what it was that rang that bell, but...
I'd just be grateful and not wonder too hard, to be honest. I mean, we haven't had any experiences like that, but with our sort of resident ghost, we do tend to find that we have sort of things happen around big events, especially this year, because there have been a lot of things happen this year with all that which will not be named and we won't get into because this is a Christmas episode. But every time there's been a big government announcement, we've had activity immediately preceding it. And I know that's not anything like on the level that Sam's telling us about.
No.
But it just kind of, it makes me wonder. I'm really grateful that happened for you.
Yeah, that was just, unlucky isn't the word. Just, I don't know what the words are, but it was an incredible, touching story. And yeah, I'm so glad and amazed that you were woken up in time to do something about it. I just have to jump back because you were talking a moment ago about the stuff that happens here when the big event's coming up and blah, blah, blah. And we've actually had a lot of activity happen here recently over the last sort of week or so. And we had a big announcement over recently, didn't we? That basically
my goodness.
Christmas has cancelled and blah, blah, blah. And that was the first big announcement we've had. I just put it together now, literally as we record.
I hadn't twigged at all until you said, like, right this second.
Yeah.
But yeah, of course, we had quite a massive upheaval just this weekend. Everything sort of did a U-turn and we'd literally had in the couple of days before that, we'd started having activity again.
The letterbox had slammed and we were hearing thumps and bangs upstairs and you were out the other day and I heard you come back about 3 times before you actually came back. And it's been really active recently. Just, it's been quiet for a little while before that. And bang, loads of stuff happening and suddenly an announcement. So literally just tweaked. Now I can see that Lil has busily been avoiding the fact that there's a quiz question that she hasn't answered yet.
I can't even remember the question, let alone give you the answer.
Okay, so this one should be fairly simple. As you know, it's traditional at Polish Christmas dinners to leave an extra place at the table in case an unexpected guest turns up. And in Portugal, they have a similar tradition. But what is it?
Oh, I really don't know. I can't even think of what would be a similar tradition. What, do you leave? I don't know. I don't know. Put me out of my misery. Go on.
You could have guessed this one. And they likewise leave an extra place at the Christmas dinner table.
Okay.
And it's for the Christmas morning feast known as Consada. And they leave an empty space for the dead.
Oh, so it's almost like a Halloween / Christmas kind of combined.
Yeah, it's similar to what we would do at Halloween.
Okay.
They leave an extra place at the table for dead souls.
Oh, cool.
And they are given food with the hope that they will provide good luck in future.
Oh, that's lovely. But I didn't guess it.
I thought you...
I mean, now you say, now I know what it is. I can see why you thought I would get it.
It is something that I would have expected you to have had a stab at guessing.
Oh, well, I've obviously had too much mulled wine.
So we're still at me at half a point, you at 1 point.
We never do very well at these quizzes, do we?
Get the feeling that you're about to, pull ahead and keep me down.
I don't know. I think you might get this one.
Okay, let's see.
Okay, this is my last question. Which royal phantom can be seen making a journey in a ghostly carriage drawn by headless horses on Christmas Eve?
No, nothing.
Oh, come on.
Nope.
You're going to kick yourself. You really are. I want to tell you the answer. I know you know this.
And I'm probably going to go Henry VIII just because headless and Henry VIII go quite well together, but it's not ringing any bells.
Oh, but it wasn't Henry I'm not giving you any clues. But you've got a while to think about it because we're not done with this episode yet.
No, it is now time for our Paranormal Postcard adventure to Ely.
A couple of years ago, on a rapidly darkening autumn evening, we visited the Cromwell House in Ely as part of the nationwide Heritage Weekend, where historic locations across the country open their doors to visitors. Sometimes these locations aren't usually open to the public. Sometimes they open outside of normal opening hours, and most of them open for free just for this one history-packed weekend a year. It's a wonderful festival, and we always try to make the most of it. Our destination at that time was Oliver Cromwell's house, but after our visit there, we couldn't help wending our way past the darkened church of St Mary's next door, across the green to the huge cannon captured during the Crimean War that casts hulking shadows across the well-tended lawn, and down the path to the cathedral, which, on this night, was lit glowingly from within, still welcoming visitors even at this late hour. We weren't going to pass up a chance to see the cathedral after sunset, when the darkness of evening filled every corner and threw long, strange shadows across the nave. And what a nave that was! We've visited many ruins of abbeys and monasteries and often remarked at the huge scale those ruins seemed to cover. Often wondered how incredible the buildings must have looked in their heyday. But it's been many years since either of us visited such a building in full and intact splendour. I last came to Ely as a child and remembered nothing of this building except the name. Outside, the building looked immense, the towers reaching endlessly up and up into the night sky, but that sight did nothing to prepare you for the interior. Stepping into the nave has you craning your neck back so far you practically tip over backwards. The high vaulted ceiling is covered with brightly painted scenes, while on either side tall carved stone archways funnel you down the nave towards a large open central space at the base of the main tower. Here, The architecture seems to unfurl into a mesmerising display known as the octagon, which is actually the result of some failed previous architecture. You see, the original central tower of the cathedral collapsed in 1322 with a terrible thunder that the monks thought must have been an earthquake. In their efforts to rebuild with a more stable structure, they came up with the octagon-shaped tower and lantern that we see today, although this term just doesn't do it justice. Standing inside the base of that tower, it feels like architecture has gone on holiday and Hogwarts has taken up residence instead. The cleverly engineered tower creates a massive open space at the centre of the cathedral, with an impossibly high tower soaring up skywards above, seemingly nothing holding up the incredible lantern at the top, through which we can see the inky blue-black of the night sky. This floating effect is mesmerising, but once we break free of our hypnosis, we begin to explore the many nooks, crannies and passageways that dive in and out of the unendingly long nave. It almost feels like its own city in here, and it's impossible to explore everywhere in the short time that we have. Every wall seems to branch off into another self-contained chapel or house a tomb with alabaster statues lying in restful repose. Underfoot are grave slabs, and everywhere ornately carved decorations, gilded reliquaries, and mysterious spiral staircases curling into the darkness of the upper floors. One of these spiral staircases used to lead to a stained glass museum above the nave's left aisle, and this is where a staff member had an encounter with one of the cathedral's many ghosts. The woman was working in the exhibition, which had just emptied after the morning's influx of visitors. Thinking the place to be empty, she was surprised to see what she thought was a lady in a long dark coat and low-brimmed dark hat. Doing her duty, she approached the visitor to ask them for the entrance fee, but when she reached the alcove where she'd seen the figure, she found the space was empty. There was only one way in and out, and that had been in view the whole time, so there was no way the lady could have exited unseen. At this point, the staff member noticed that the room had turned quite suddenly icy cold, and a strange feeling overcame the woman as she began to wonder whether it was in fact a lady she had seen at all. All at once, she realised that what she'd taken for a long coat and a low round hat was in fact a cowl and habit, and what she'd witnessed was one of Ely's ghostly monks. Despite the shock of the realisation, she didn't feel ill at ease at all. The odd encounter had a feeling of peace to it, and she was merely left with a sense of wonder and curiosity. Another woman had an even closer encounter with one of the phantom monks while she was taking some friends on a tour around the cathedral. Just as they were about to leave, she stopped to talk to a priest wearing a long cloak and cowl. She asked him about the gift shop, but on receiving no answer, she turned towards her friends to share a look about his rude response. However, when she turned back to where the robed figure had just been moments before, he'd vanished. There was nowhere for him to have disappeared to so completely, and it left the witness with the impression that he must have vanished into the wall. The witness remarked on how she never used to believe the tale of Ely's ghostly monks until she saw one with her own eyes. Apparently, interaction with these ghostly shadows of the past are not that uncommon within these hallowed walls. A previous head verger at the cathedral recounted his tale for Margaret Haynes and Vivian Doughty, authors of the book Haunted Ely, and recalled how he used to notice one of the congregation muttering to himself through the service. We must expect he merely thought the chap a bit of a character, until, that is, one evening, when the man approached the verger to ask just who it was that liked so much to chat to him through the service. The verger drew his brows together in a confused frown and tried to assure the gentleman that he always sat alone. The congregant was upset, assuring the verger that he'd been conversing with a man in a hooded black robe. A man who, the disgruntled congregant explained, had been standing right behind the verger until just a moment ago. We tiptoed through the echoing halls, trying to be as quiet and as inconspicuous as mice. As it happened, a concert was being held at the far end of the cathedral, and strains of music reverberated around thick stone walls, drifting into every softly lit chapel and corridor. But despite the music, there remained a reverent hush, blanketing the vast building in a palpable quietude that seemed to be full of whispering secrets just waiting to be uncovered. Of course, we had to go back. Ever since that day 2 years ago, Ely has held me in an entranced spell. And it's not just the cathedral either, but the mystery of the fenlands it's built upon.
When the Romans came to England, they intended to conquer, to rule, and to modernise. But there was one wild place they couldn't quite tame: the fens. This wild marshland of eastern England was largely underwater, the landscape one of sucking peat bogs that only the native and fearsome tribes could navigate. They were highly defensible, as only locals knew where the hidden causeways and safe boat passages were hidden in amongst the reed beds and sedge, and invaders were easily lost in the deadly and mysterious landscape. Of course, part of the defence were the legends of the landscape itself, and outsiders were terribly afraid of the will-o'-the-wisp lights which were said to lead unsuspecting victims into marshy quicksand, or the black shuck who roamed at night, his blood-red eyes piercing the mist rising off the water. Even the natives themselves were thought of as terrifying, ferocious, half-amphibious folk, and maybe it's no wonder that the Romans eventually gave up on this seemingly inhospitable place, deeming it ungovernable. For the natives themselves, the fens were a rich and fertile landscape, teeming with fish and fowl, and the wetlands providing all the materials they needed to make a living, even growing in abundance the willow they needed to weave traps for the most famous of fenland produce, eels. Despite being largely underwater, the fens were dotted with hills, known as islands due to the way they rose above water level, and it was here that the locals built their dwellings. The largest in the area, central to our story today, actually became known as the Isle of Eels, so abundant were their particular food source. In the 17th century, the fens were drained of water to access the rich and fertile soils below for farming, but even today, in the dry modern landscape, the Isle of Eels is remembered in the title The Isle of Ely. And as we return to Ely, along the still built-up causeways raising the road above the level of floodwater, we see why Ely Cathedral became known as the Ship of the Fens. Fenland is vast and flat. The horizon stretches off into the distance with nothing to break it as far as the eye can see, except, that is, for the soaring towers of the cathedral, piercing the sky with its pointed spires. During the time the fens were underwater, with the rising marsh mists obscuring the hump of land that held it, Ely Cathedral must have looked, for all the world, like a great floating fortress. Ely is a small place. It's officially known as a city because of the cathedral, but you can walk around the town in a matter of minutes, and it might have easily become just another small unknown farming town were it not for an Anglo-Saxon princess called Etheldreda. born in the 7th century, around the year 636, this far back truly accurate dates are difficult to come by, Etheldreda was the daughter of the Saxon king Anna of East Anglia. The king followed that new and unusual Christianity, which wasn't appreciated by the neighbouring pagan king of Mercia, Penda. But despite the opposition to this new faith, King Anna raised all his daughters as Christians, and for their part they all three desired to become nuns. But it was not to be, as King Anna married them off as political chess pieces. It was certainly not what Etheldreda wanted for her future, but her first marriage did at least come with a dowry, the Isle of Ely. After her first husband's demise, she briefly returned to her Fenland island, but it wasn't long before her father married her off again, a marriage which she eventually ran away from, over 200 miles in fact, back to Ely where she set about fulfilling her dream to build a monastery. And that is exactly what she did, establishing a double monastery for monks and nuns on top of an older church which is thought to have been destroyed by Penda, king of the Mercians. Etheldreda was apparently much loved during her lifetime, but it was after her death that she was elevated from a queen to a saint. Originally, she was buried in the grounds of the monastery she'd founded, but 16 years later, Etheldreda's sister, who had taken over the running of the monastery, decided to bring her body inside the building to rest in a more stately tomb. The Benedictine monk Bede the Venerable recorded that upon opening her grave 16 years after her death, Etheldreda's body had not decayed at all, and in fact had returned to a youthful complexion she had long since lost by the time of her death. A physician is reported to have told that the swelling in her neck caused by the plague had healed, and that a spring of pure water bubbled up from beneath her burial site. These seemingly miraculous events led to her canonization, and for a fairly long period of history, saints were big business, and a shrine to the newly sainted abbess soon had people flocking to visit from all over the country. People came in reverence or fascination, they came in pilgrimage, and they came to be healed. Saintly shrines were essentially one of the first tourist industries, because of course all those pilgrims had to find lodgings and food from local people, with rooms to rent or wares to sell. Ely became a very popular destination to visit, and the relics of saints became ever more valuable. Sainthood must have run in the family of the Saxon princess, as her sister Withburga was disinterred after her death with oddly similar results. Again the body was found to be incorrupt, and again a spring of fresh water welled up in place of her body. The once abbess became Saint Withburga, but she was not left to rest in peace any more than her sister, and we briefly move away from the cathedral to find out why. We walk through the Porter Monastery Gateway, heading down the hill with the Dean's Meadow on one side of us and the remains of a Motte and Bailey castle to the other, and towards the lifeblood of this ancient town, the River Ouse, where we find out what happened to Etheldreda's sister, and our next ghost story. Withburga wasn't buried in Ely, even though she'd ruled the monastery there. She actually died at Dereham Abbey in AD 743. But in 974, Ely decided that it wanted its beloved abbess back, even though she'd been dead for a couple of 100 years. A group of monks and soldiers set out to steal away her remains by night, loading them onto a boat and making their escape back to Ely down the River Ouse. We walk through the Jubilee Gardens and find the riverside, now festive with bright boats sporting strings of Christmas lights. But on dark, misty mornings, it's said that you can hear the sound of monks singing drifting across the water on the breeze, and if you look closely into the gloom, you might just see the shape of a boat behind the curtain of mist, carrying robed figures clustered around an open casket. Some say that the ghostly figures and singing experienced by people down here at the riverside is none other than the clandestine return of St. Withburger's remains, with a troop of soldiers and monks sent to retrieve her. We don't see any ghostly monks ourselves at the water's edge, but we don't linger too long in the brisk December evening, and with dark falling rapidly around us, we begin the climb back up the hill, because even though you might think that Ely has already produced its fair share of ghosts, there are even more to be found outside the cathedral than there are inside.
Around the cathedral itself is a sprawl of what were once monastic buildings. The cathedral we see now is not in fact the one built by St. Etheldreda, which was destroyed by Vikings in the year 870, but the one built by the Normans after William the Conqueror invaded England in 1066. Although it took a bit longer than that before Old Will got his hands on Ely, and this was largely down to a rather rebellious lad known as Hereward the Wake. Many of you will have heard of Hereward the Wake, the moniker Wake thought to mean watchful, but you may not have known that he was also referred to as Hereward the Outlaw or Exile. Maybe today we'd think of him as a revolutionary, but his father, an 11th century nobleman, thought of him as a troublemaker, and eventually sent him away to France. And here Hereward remained, working as a mercenary in Flanders during the Norman invasion of England. And when Hereward did return to his family home, he found his mother evicted and his brother murdered, his decapitated head mounted on a spike on the gate outside the family house. Hereward swore revenge, and revenge he had, reportedly slaying the intruders within the family home. But that wasn't enough for Hereward, and he began a guerrilla warfare against the Normans, determined to stop their rule reaching all corners of the country. Now, we've talked before about how the Normans' conquering of England wasn't exactly a straightforward affair. Of course, native landowners weren't just going to cheerfully hand over their lands and estates to William's men. But some pockets of resistance were more troublesome to Will than others, and the wild, untamed fens with Ely at its centre were the biggest thorn in the conqueror's side. His well-outfitted army was no match for the mysterious, treacherous marshes of the fens, and Hereward knew it, using every asset of the landscape to his advantage. Unable to find the secret and safe passages across the sucking swamps, William ordered his men to build a causeway into enemy territory. The structure, thrown up hastily with none of the local skill and knowledge necessary, buckled under the weight of the soldiers, and only one made it across, who was soon captured. William's next attempt was sturdier, and a little bizarrely, Will threw an extra weapon into the mix, a witch he employed to hurl insults and curses at the natives in an attempt to unnerve them. Hereward apparently remained unfazed and simply set fire to the Norman causeway, resulting in many of the attackers hurling themselves into the water, their heavy armour making them an easy meal for the hungry marsh to swallow up whole. Between these two failed attacks, it said that the locals were still finding the bodies of Norman soldiers, rising horridly out of the water in rotten and rusted armour for decades afterwards. Eventually, William resorted to bribery and managed to coerce an earl and abbot of Ely to reveal the location of secret crossings onto the island. And at this treachery from his own side, Hereward was undone. So what became of Hereward after the Normans finally claimed their hard-won prize? Well, nobody really knows, but it is claimed that his faithful dog still patrols the area his master fought so hard to protect. A great, hulking black beast of a dog who prowls through the night, terrifying witnesses with his blood-red eyes glowing luminously from the undergrowth, seen lurking at the edge of the fen, where it's thought that Hereward may have made his last stand against the Normans. Or there again, maybe it's the black shuck they're seeing, the legend which has reputedly haunted this area for many hundreds of years. Or maybe, just maybe, the two are one and the same. Whatever the answer, the spectral black hound has made some dramatic appearances in the area over the years. He's been seen moving through the night along ancient trackways in the direction of Witchford Village and at nearby Wicken Fen, and has been spotted bounding along the roadside, where he's seen by motorists startled by the red eyes glaring out at them from the darkness at the side of the road. One couple in the 60s saw him darting out into the road in front of their car and thought for sure they'd run him over. But on getting out of their vehicle to investigate, they could find no sign of any animal. The Normans may have finally taken the fens, and the 17th century government may have drained them, but even today, they remain mysterious, untamed, a place where legends live on.
And talking of legends, what of St. Etheldreda and her saintly remains? Well, she retained a starring spot in the new Norman cathedral at Ely, and pilgrims continue to visit the shrine that was made for her there. However, it was all to be undone by Henry VIII's dissolution of the monasteries. This dissolution is why so many of the abbeys and monasteries we visit are in ruins, because after the monks and nuns were evicted by Henry's men and the buildings were looted for their treasure, many of them were left to rot. A few escaped abandonment, Ely amongst them, although it did not come through entirely unscathed. A quick glance around Ely's Lady Chapel reveals the scars left by the Reformation. Nearly every carving is defaced or beheaded, and poor Etheldreda's shrine was destroyed, her remains seemingly scattered to the winds. But her story wasn't quite over yet, as some of her remains must have been smuggled out in secret and hidden away for future generations, as the 11th Duke of Norfolk found out when renovating his Sussex estate in 1811. Tucked away safely in a priest hole, he discovered a hand. Not what one might expect to find during a spot of DIY at the best of times, and this was no ordinary hand. It was mounted on a silver plate of 10th century style, engraved with the words Manus Sanctae Etheldredae and 673 in Roman numerals, meaning the Holy Hand of Etheldreda in the year 673. And so it seemed that not all the relics of St. Etheldreda were lost to the Reformation after all, and after a few decades of bouncing around from owner to owner, the saintly hand arrived back in Ely, just in time for the Golden Jubilee celebrations of the founding of St. Etheldreda's Catholic Church in 1953, where a local resident saw the ancient treasure, describing it as having a bluish-white pallor. Apparently, the arrival of the hand at the home of Father Guy of Ely had the effect of immediately curing a case of noisy poltergeist activity which had been causing a disturbance in the presbytery where the father lived. But that's not what the hand is most famous for in Ely. Many of the monastic buildings surrounding the cathedral are now used as part of King's School, one of the oldest schools in England, founded in 970 AD to educate the young choristers for Ely. It's also a boarding school, and so, as you might expect, some of these buildings accommodate the dormitories of the students, and it was in one of these that 3 students in 1995 witnessed a ghostly blue hand gliding up the banister of the back staircase. We found the exact building on our exploration around what was once the enclave of the cathedral, just beyond the south side. Peeping over a wall, we peer into the warmly lit windows of 12th century Priory House, wondering about that summer night in 1995 and what on earth the students thought of the phantom hand. It's unknown who pinned ownership of the hand on St. Etheldreda, although you can see how they arrived at the conclusion, with the saint's hand being such an important relic for the city, and the original descriptions of it noting the bluish-white colour. These days, after exposure to the air, the hand is apparently shriveled and discoloured to a brown hue, but we don't see it for ourselves. It still resides in the Catholic Church of Ely, but with current restrictions and considerations being what they are, we save that one for next time.
As we meander our way through the warren-like streets around the cathedral, we come across the sites of many other encounters with Ely's ghostly residents. At the south door at the back of the cathedral, 3 boys making their way through the wartime blackout of 1944 were frightened by the apparitions of 2 monks having a silent argument. They were gesticulating angrily, waving their arms and stamping their feet, but the peculiar sight was accompanied by no sound. The eerie silence to the inexplicable scene had the boys quickly turning tail and fleeing into the night. Several people have been taking the pathway through the cathedral grounds into town when they've been stopped in their tracks by the sight of a robed figure emerging from or disappearing into a bricked-up doorway. One witness was so perplexed by the 2 cassocked apparitions he saw drifting silently across the cathedral lawn that he waited to see if they would reappear. Astonishingly, they did, making their way back across the same pathway half an hour later. Even more amazingly, he witnessed them again the next week, once again making their same perambulations towards the north transept. This time, with admirable fortitude, the witness tried to speak to them. But sadly, he received no response. The unseeing, unnoticing monks merely continued their well-worn path, as they probably had been doing for centuries. As we wend our way back to the car, the rapidly falling wintertime night now fully engulfing us, plunging the maze of narrow, winding streets into a thick darkness. It's frankly hard not to imagine a robed figure peeling away from one of the oddly shaped shadows in the many niches and bricked-up doorways of the cathedral and drifting off across the grounds. But as curious as the ghostly monks and saintly hands of Ely are, one of my favourite stories is that of a very ordinary ghost, and quite a modern one. The member of cathedral staff who we met in our very first ghost story tonight had one other inexplicable experience to share, from a February evening in 1989, when she saw one of the retired cathedral clerics walking his old collie dog down Oyster Lane, just a stone's throw from the cathedral. It was a very typical sight indeed, and really the only odd thing about it was that the cleric had actually passed away in 1988, and his beloved dog had died the year before. So maybe it's not the dramatic and sometimes bloody history that has resulted in so many ghosts at Ely after all. Maybe the place just has a certain ancient magic about it that draws its spirits in and keeps them lingering close.
And that brings us to the end of our Paranormal Postcard adventure in Ely, but if you're interested in seeing our excursion to Ely, then we've released a video for our patrons, which you can become from as little as $1 a month, which details our visit to Ely, and we share some of the other ghost stories that we might not have been able to cover in this episode.
Yeah, if you are interested in the other ghosts of haunted Ely, we haven't even scratched the surface. There are so many, we couldn't possibly fit them all into one episode. Do check out the book Haunted Ely by Margaret Haynes and Vivian Doughty. It's basically the book on Ely Ghosts. In fact, it's the only book on Ely Ghosts, really. It's sort of the source for all other stories of Ely Ghosts, and it is well worth checking out, especially if you're intending to visit. Do visit if you get the opportunity. It's a magnificent place.
And now it is time for me to lose the Knock Once for Yes Christmas quiz.
Not necessarily. I am going to restate the question for you, though, because obviously it's been a while.
It was quite a while.
After the Paranormal Postcard, I've forgotten the question. Which royal phantom can be seen making a journey in a ghostly carriage drawn by headless horses on Christmas Eve? You know this. Come on, I have faith in you.
Okay, well, I'm trying to think of... Was he headless or the horseman headless?
Why are you assuming it's he?
Just because I was thinking of royals that had been beheaded. And wasn't Charles beheaded?
There are loads of royals that have been beheaded.
The fact that you've said that makes me think...
Well, I've given you a clue now, haven't I?
Probably a feminine royal. Is it Mary?
Well, there are loads of Royal Marys.
Well, the fact that Queen of Scots.
She was beheaded, yes, but that's not the answer, I'm afraid.
Then I honestly don't know.
Oh, you are going to kick yourself, though. The answer is Lady Jane Grey, who can reportedly be seen on Christmas Eve. And I never said that she was beheaded. I said the horses were headless.
Yeah, I'm not kicking myself because it doesn't really mean anything.
Oh, but it's local. Okay, so Lady Jane Grey can reportedly be seen on Christmas Eve boarding a horse-drawn carriage which sweeps away towards the church, or in some versions towards the house, in Bradgate Park in Leicestershire.
Oh, well, it's not that local either. I thought Mary, Queen of Scots, because she was round the corner.
Oh, okay, yeah. Not quite that local.
She was local.
Not quite that local. Okay.
This is like something that's happened in another county that I don't really know much
it's a really local county.
Well, you could say anything in this country is reasonably local.
Yeah, I suppose. But anyway, like any ghost story, there are varying accounts, and to be fair, only some of them describe the horses as being headless, but I just liked the more dramatic version of them being headless. And that story came to you from the Almanac of British Ghosts by Ruth Roper Wilde. And if you want to learn more about Lady Jane Grey and the ghosts of Bradgate Park, you can go on a fantastic ghost walk in the park itself, run by the wonderful Haunted Heritage. And we'll put links to both of those in the show notes.
So I can't win now, but
Nope.
I'm going to recover, hopefully, a tiny smidgen of my honour and respect with this question, because I think you're probably not going to know this one.
Oh, you're probably right.
So you'll probably only win by half a point, which is a very narrow margin for wins as they
It's
go.
a narrow victory.
Very narrow. So, we all know about Krampus, and we've talked in previous Christmas specials about the Yule Cat and Grilla the Giantess of Scandinavian folklore. But should you find yourself in Greece at Christmas, what supernatural beastie should you be on the lookout for?
Oh, gosh. In Greece. Oh, I haven't got a clue. I'm just going to have to make a stab in the dark. Okay, what could it be? Well, it's not going to be a giant cat, is it? Because we've done that. It's not going to be a giantess.
There's nothing to say that isn't something that we've covered before, but it's not necessarily something that we have. It's, could be anything.
What? I think your clue didn't help.
Who said it was a clue?
Oh, God.
I'm recovering the honour of the fit.
I'm not sure this is honourable.
It's a bit of Christmas folklore.
Right.
I always stick with the Christmas theme.
I know, you do. You're quite
All you need to
predictable.
do is research Christmas and you'll nail them.
Well, all you need to do is research the ghost stories of our local area if you're going to go down that road.
Well, I would, but it wasn't our local area.
Technical. Right, Greece.
You've got some time to think about it.
Okay, yes, we do. Because
we do have another story. It's a blooper.
Yes.
And we thought this would fit very nicely in our Christmas special to sort of round up with a little amusing blooper.
We love a good blooper.
We do.
And this one is from Aimee.
When I was 18 years old and still living with my parents in the house we moved into when I was 11, I was having some trouble falling asleep in my bed, which was, and still is, not unusual. This night, however, was a full moon, and even with the blinds turned shut, my room was quite bright. I'd recently rearranged my room. I moved my bed from the middle of the wall over to the corner right against one of the two windows. Since I had a new vantage point, I was staring into the air vent on the ceiling. I thought that since it was in my line of sight, it was as good a thing to stare at as any other. After a few moments, I realised that two large, bright eyes were peering down at me. I froze. Thinking it was maybe a trick of the light, I moved my head side to side and up and down, but the eyes seemed to follow me. I freaked out and my brain tried to rationalise it. Perhaps an animal had been trapped in the ductwork. I'd often heard scratching in my room at night, like a squirrel or other small rodent was between the wall and the siding outside of the house, clawing at the wall behind my head to get out. This was one of the reasons I moved my bed to the corner. Not knowing what to do, I just stared at the eyes, waiting for some movement. Perhaps this animal was watching me because it was afraid of me, and we were both watching each other, alert and scared of each other, but they never blinked, not once. I'm not sure how long I stared into those eyes. All I know is that I woke up in the morning, not remembering I'd fallen asleep, and shot up to stand on my bed. I opened the vent wider and looked inside, and there they were, the two eyes that had caused me so much distress the night before. Two screws, visible from my bed's new vantage point in the room. I had been so certain some malevolent entity or monster had been waiting for me to fall asleep and attack me. I felt so foolish at the time, but now I just find it absolutely hilarious, and I hope you do as well.
We certainly did. Thank you so much for that, Aimee. That was brilliant. We very much enjoyed that.
It's a great story, and don't feel bad because it happens to all of us.
Oh God, yeah. It happens to us all the time.
The amount of times, like a coat on the back of a chair, or I think your onesie scared the heck out of me one night, and I woke up and because it was an all-in-one onesie, it just looked like somebody stood in the doorway. Oh, I nearly had a heart attack.
Oh, we've all been there. We have all been there. Well, that is actually the end of all of our stories for today. Thank you so much to everybody who shared your experiences. We absolutely love hearing them. And of course, we love sharing them. And that is what the show is all about. We're always looking for more people's paranormal encounters. So if you have experienced something spooky and you're happy to share it, please do get in touch with us through our website at knockonceforyes.com.
It's nearly time to finish up. But before then, the Christmas quiz.
Remind me of the question.
I'll give you the abridged version. And that is, if you are to find yourself in Greece over Christmas, what supernatural beastie should we be on the lookout for?
I really don't know. So because it's Christmas, I'm just going to throw out a stupid guess. Is it a were-rabbit?
It is not a were-rabbit.
I'm kind of disappointed that it's not a were-rabbit.
I'm afraid that no, it's not. Well, no, it's not even close. You should be aware of the Cali Canceros. They are a malevolent goblin.
Oh.
Now, this is where I was quite interested because it is believed that they dwell underground, but come to the surface during the 12 days of Christmas.
Oh.
Now, what they do when they're underground is that they saw the world tree so that it will collapse. And I wasn't aware that the Greeks were...
Oh.
Yeah, I didn't know that was something that was in Greek mythology.
I didn't.
I thought that was purely Norse. But yeah, so apparently they spend basically all their time underground, soaring at the world tree, and just before they're about to cut through it, Christmas dawns and they can come to the surface, and they muck about with humans and forget that they're sawing the world tree. And then on the 6th of January, the sun starts doing its thing again, and they have to go back underground, and their work has been undone. And
I was going to say, has the tree magically healed? Oh, cool. Okay.
So, yeah, they're going to break a... We sort of, are mucked about with, and they sort of toy with us for a bit, and we distract them from the world tree ending global destruction that they were going to do.
Oh, wow. I've never heard of that before. That's really interesting.
I hadn't. I'm going to have to read up on it a bit more because, like we were saying, I had no idea that the Greeks had any kind of world tree myth. I thought it was all Olympus and...
Yeah, no, I've never heard of that before, but that
Bearing in mind I did classics and I sort of toured Greece as a younger chap, I ought to know a little bit more. But no, it didn't. I didn't know that at all.
No, totally new one on me, but that's... Yeah, I'm going to look more into that. That's an interesting one. Thank you. So, even if I did... Well, did I lose? No. I don't think anybody really won, though, did we?
You won by half a point.
Only because I, kind of gave you half a point. I just, I'll call it a draw.
That's very, very generous. Very, very Christmas-like of you.
And talking of Christmas, we've got one more thing to do before we go today, and that is our annual Christmas cracker. We've done this since the very first KOFY Christmas episode, and we didn't realise that we were confusing hundreds of people because Christmas crackers, it turns out, aren't available in every country. So a lot of you thought we were... I don't think you understood what on earth we were doing. And why would you if you don't have Christmas crackers? Because crackers sounds like a food stuff. And what we're talking about, well, they're very strange. They're always really naff. It's basically the inside of a loo roll covered in wrapping paper, tied at two ends, and it's got
with
like a
sort of cap gun explosive in the middle.
Yes, like a mini firecracker in the middle. So when you pull it, it goes bang. One end comes off. Things fly at your head, usually cheap toys. There's like a prize inside, which is always really plasticky and kind of rubbish.
And whoever gets the biggest bit of the cracker wins.
Yeah. And what you win is a terrible joke and a paper hat that you basically have to... We always pull our crackers before Christmas dinner in our family, and then you have to put on the paper hat, which none of them fit any head in the entire world. They're always either so big they fall in your eyes or so small that they pop off the top of your head. And you have to wear it throughout the whole of Christmas dinner in complete seriousness.
And nobody knows why.
No, nobody knows why. But we love them because they're tradition, and every year we pull them just so that we can share with you the horrendous, the terrible, the awful jokes within, because it just wouldn't be Christmas if we didn't. So without further ado, Fitz.
Oh, we won one each.
We did. That's unusual.
Indeed.
Oh, and it smells of gunpowder or whatever it is. I'm sure it's not gunpowder.
Okay, I appear to have a plastic eye patch.
Wow. I appear to have... I don't actually know what it is. It's some kind of key ring. Oh, it's like a clapping... It's a clacker key ring. I've got my very fetching green hat, which I will put on, and it will immediately fall down over my eyes because I've got a tiny head.
I'm not sure they fit my head anyway, but I'm wearing a headset, so it's even more not going to work. So, joke. What do snowmen eat for lunch?
I don't know.
Iceburgers.
That is... that really is awful.
That's particularly bad.
I mean, they're meant to be awful, but that's really bad.
They're meant to be terrible, but that's a stretch.
Okay. Who delivers presents to baby sharks?
I don't know who delivers
I'm not
presents
surprised.
to baby sharks.
Santa Jaws.
Oh.
These are spectacular crackers this year.
Oh, that was bad. That was really bad.
That's half the joy of them. Well, thank you, lovely listeners. That really is it now. We will leave you in peace.
Sorry.
Thank you to every single one of you who supported us this year in any way that you've been able to. It's been a rubbish year. You guys have been the cornerstone of what's kept us going. We love our listeners so much. You are all fantastic. We have the best listeners and the best supporters in the world, and we wouldn't be able to do this show without you. Thank you so much. I truly hope you manage to have as good a Christmas as you can in the circumstances, and that your 2021 is significantly better than this year.
So, Merry Christmas from Coffee HQ. We hope you have a fantastic festive season and a happy new year, and that you'll join us in 2021 for some more Not Once for Yes.